Go when you're ready.
Hello, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Dirt Nap City. This is the show about interesting people who happen to be dead. I'm the host for today, Alex, and I'm here with my friend Kelly. How you doing, Kelly?
Doing great, man. Absolutely excited to be here.
I'm a little excited about this today, but I'm a little nervous as well.
Okay.
I think I might have broken some of the rules that we originally had for Dirt Nap City. I'm not going to be talking about anybody who's alive, but I did take some liberties with this one today. So hopefully you'll like who we're talking about today. The first thing I'm going to do is break the rule. When I give you a clue, I'm actually going to give you the person's name.
Okay.
And so I'm going to right away tell you who we're talking about. But you have to guess who it is, who that is, what that means. Okay.
All right. Yeah, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, you should be. You might hate this. And you might say, why did you talk about that person? But I don't know. We'll see. The person's name is John Howland. Do you know who that is?
John Howland. I do not. I've never heard. I don't ever recall hearing that name before.
Okay. This might help you. He was born in 1592.
John Howland, 1592.
Moved to Dirt Nap City in 1673.
Was he a Puritan? Like a someone over in the Pilgrim times?
We're going to have a special Thanksgiving episode today. I was inspired by your Halloween episode of Harry Houdini. Today, we're going to talk about the Pilgrims. One in particular, John Howland, who I know, who I came to know as the boy who fell off the Mayflower.
Wow. Okay. No, this is all news to me. I'm excited. Little history lesson.
Yeah. Well, I think every week on Dirt Nap City is a little history lesson.
True.
But today, yeah. So let me just start with that. So if you are a history professor, and if this is your area of specialty, back off.
Yeah. We're not going to try and put you out of a job or anything here.
Like I've said before, I think this is the perfect podcast for somebody in junior high, middle school. Maybe you have to write a paper tomorrow. Just listen to this, write as fast as you can. You'll be fine. We've done all the work.
Yeah. You could even use us as a source. You could put a footnote or a citation that says from Dirt Nap City, according to Alex at Dirt Nap City.
So let's talk about the Mayflower.
Yes.
First of all, the Mayflower itself, they were saying, "Oh, this is the Mayflower, and this is a big deal to come to the New World." It turns out a lot of ships back then were called the Mayflower. I think at the time there were like 26 English ships called the Mayflower. I don't know why everybody was calling their thing the Mayflower, but it wasn't that different than any of the others. And there were lots of ships kind of going back and forth between England and the New World. But this one is kind of became iconic. I think because of all the problems that they had, but then also because some of the notable people that ended up going on that voyage. But most importantly, I think it became iconic because the people took really good notes while they were there. And so it's the one that we know the most about. It wasn't like it's the first ship to go to the New World, and it wasn't the last. It wasn't like flying to the moon or anything like that. It was just one that was very heavily recorded.
Well documented.
Yeah. Do you know when it was, though? What year are we talking?
Well, I thought the Mayflower was, I was going to say 1492, but that was Columbus.
Yeah, he didn't come to America anyways. He just came to like El Salvador or something.
Yeah. Well, he came to South America.
Yeah, Central America.
Wasn't there an Italian guy named Vesece Americanus that was actually the first?
Back,
yeah. And then the Vikings, of course, had been here before that.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's not like there weren't people here. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I'm not really sure. I guess the Pilgrims were kind of late 1500s.
1620. We're talking
1620.
1620, and in fact, they were going to have a big 400-year celebration in 2020, but COVID messed that up.
Ah,
So in fact, had this project called Mayflower 2020, where they were going to have a bunch of people, a bunch of descendants of the Pilgrims get on this new ship, the new Mayflower, and make the exact voyage. But the whole thing kind of got scrapped because of COVID. Like everything else in our world gets ruined. So now we got to wait another 100 years for another celebration, I guess. The word pilgrim, though, it's funny because they didn't call themselves pilgrims. In fact, we didn't start calling these people pilgrims until a couple of 100 years later. It was like the 1850s, and during like during I think it was the Civil War, around the time where Lincoln was trying to hold the country together, that he really started talking about, well, let's think about the people that started this thing, and trying to get people kind of on the Union side of remember how this whole thing started. But prior to that, the 200 years before that, 250 years before that, people weren't really talking a lot about the Pilgrims, and definitely didn't call them pilgrims. So
did they have
they
a name
called them,
back then?
they called themselves separatists.
Ah,
They didn't like the king. And that was King James, by the way, and it's the same King James that
as
had
the Bible.
his version of the Bible, and they weren't into that version. They were actually from a religion called they were called the Brownists, and it was a break from the Church of England. And at the time, the Church of England was like very it wasn't just about what they learned in church or what they talked about. They're very kind of in your face about everything. In fact, you get fined if you didn't go to church. You got fined a shilling, which today is about 20 pounds, which is about $20, for you American listeners out there. So every time you didn't go to church or a holiday, if you missed church, you get fined $20.
But if you went, you probably had to put that much in the till anyway, right? So
Yeah, exactly. So that's good. That's a little utilitarian thing you're saying. So
yeah, you could
either way, I'm out
go and
$20.
you're either going to go and pay $20 or not go and pay $20. So I guess it depends on what football game was on that day, right?
That's a good call. So originally they didn't decide they were going to go to the New World. That was way too much of an adventure and too far. They originally just decided to go live in Holland. So they all went to what's now the Netherlands. But then what they noticed is that was making them all Dutch. Their kids started not speaking English. They would have
Right.
only speak Dutch. And Holland was about to go to war with Spain. So that was kind of a dicey place to be at the time. So they decided to go to Virginia instead. Now, you may know that Plymouth Rock is not in Virginia, right?
Yeah, they finally land on Plymouth Rock. Someone said we're home. It may not look like much, but at this point, I don't care.
I thought you were going to do the Malcolm X quote about how we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us.
That's a good one. No, I was trying to quote Schoolhouse Rock. You know, there is actually a Schoolhouse Rock called No More Kings.
Yeah. And I think Schoolhouse Rock, as great as it was, I think it might have contributed to all the myths that we have about a lot of things we know about history today.
True.
They kind of, I don't know. They didn't dumb it down necessarily, but there was a lot of things that they kind of sanitized.
Well, it had to rhyme, right? So they had to change. They had to take some liberties to make it rhyme.
So they decided to go to Virginia, and people like John Howland, he was actually an indentured servant. They had a lot of those back then. So in order to pay for the trip, he had to go to work for people, and like 3 years would pay for a trip across the Atlantic. So you would work, and then in return, you'd get to go on this ship. And there was a lot of people.
Did you work before you went, or did you have to work once you arrived?
Well, both. And then depending on how much money you owed. So I think for John Howland, he was working before he got there, and then once he got there. And then his goal was, once he was free of all that, then he was going to go back to London. Now that he had some money, he was going to make some money then, and then go back to London and start a life over there. But he never did that. How long do you think it took to get to the New World? They were leaving from Plymouth, England, and trying to arrive in Virginia. How long do you think that journey took?
From England to Virginia, I'm going to say 6 weeks.
Pretty close. It took 10 weeks.
10 weeks at sea.
10 weeks. And that's because the seas were terrible, as we'll get into. I think it might have supposed to have been taking 8 weeks, and it took 2 extra weeks because of the rough seas.
When the Mayflower, the one we're talking about, came across, it took 10 weeks, but a normal trip would have been 8 weeks.
So it was right around this time of year when they were out there 402 years ago. Today, if you wanted to make a crossing, like on the Royal Caribbean, it would take 6 to 8 days, depending on your itinerary.
Wow.
And cost you, if you wanted an interior room, which sounds awful. I mean, you don't have a window. You're just on a ship with no window. It costs you about $700 and takes 6 to 8 days to go across the Atlantic.
Wow. Versus 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, if you wanted a nice cabin or a suite or something like that, it'd be about $1,500 on Royal.
And I don't think the Mayflower had like 24-hour buffets or water slides or slot machines.
Let me tell you, they had. Do you know how many people were on the Mayflower?
180.
You're close. You're very close. It was 102 passengers and 30 crew. 132 people.
Okay.
One person died on the way, but one person was born. So they left with 102, arrived with 102.
Wow.
Net zero.
Yeah.
But it was the area that they had. So that's 132 people. And the living area was about 80 feet by 20 feet. So like 1,600 square feet for over 100 people to just, it was, the smell was wretched.
No staterooms, no individual cabins, none of that.
No, this wasn't the Titanic. I think the crew maybe stayed under the deck, and everybody else stayed above the deck. But no, I don't think they had rooms. They were just kind of.
Did they have bunks?
Everywhere.
You think they had bunks to sleep on?
I don't think so. I don't know. I've seen some of the pictures, and I saw when I was there. I was at Plymouth Plantation in 2019, and they were gearing up for the Mayflower 2020 thing, and they had a kind of a mock-up of it. It didn't look like they had individual rooms. Maybe the captain probably had a room. You know what the captain's name was?
John Smith?
No, you might have heard this name before, but you didn't know who he was. Miles Standish.
Oh, yeah. That? I have heard that name. Yeah. Miles Standish.
You might know him from, I think they mentioned him in This Is America, Charlie Brown.
Yeah, Miles Standish. I have heard that name.
Yeah. Well, that's who he was the captain of the Mayflower.
I think his middle name was Miles and his first name was Sam, and he went by S. Miles. So they called him Smiles. All right. Sorry. We'll cut that out too. Smiles Standish, everyone.
Hashtag dad joke. So the seas were horrible. Just they maybe picked the wrong time of the year to go to this trip, but they actually brought 2 ships, and one of them was anchoring them so bad they just got rid of it. They just left it. But somewhere along the way, the ship started to come apart. It was just breaking apart.
Oh no!
And they were considering actually turning around and going back. And everybody said everybody has to go below the deck. But our friend John Holland, it said it smelled so bad that he had to go up on the deck just to get some fresh air. And when he went up there, a wave hit him and sent him overboard.
Oh no!
He went about 12 feet underwater, and then somehow somebody threw him a rope, and he was able to get the rope, climb back in. But yeah, the interesting thing about that story, and when you go to Plymouth, they make a big deal about that story. He's called the boy who fell off the Mayflower. There's a children's book written about him. He wasn't exactly a boy, though. He was born in 1592, and this was 1620. So he was about 28 years old
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
time. It
Which,
maybe
considering the
sounds,
lifespan of most people at that time, he was actually pretty old.
yeah, he was like middle aged. Maybe they called him a boy because he was an indentured servant and didn't have any kind of social standing. So, as far as they're concerned, he was just a boy. Plus, they probably all dressed the same. He was probably wearing short pants. I don't know. He probably just looked like a
Well, and
kid
he
or
might have
something.
also just, put in his email signature, he, him.
What are you doing, man? No, but they didn't think he was a girl. They just said it was a boy instead of a man. But he was actually a grown ass man.
28-year-old man that they called the boy who fell over. And I think it also, the story sounds more interesting. The boy who cried wolf, the boy who, did this, did that. It's never the man. It's always the boy.
On this ship, if you were going to go for 8 to 10 weeks, what kind of food do you think you would bring?
Well, you'd want to bring some citrus so you didn't get scurvy, right? You'd want some oranges.
They didn't know about all that back then, but you're right. A lot of people got scurvy.
I'd probably want to bring some dried meat.
Yeah, they brought some salted herring.
Hard cheeses.
They didn't bring any cheese. They brought beer. They brought lots of barrels of beer.
That's good.
They brought onions and cabbage, which, in a cramped 150 people in an 80 by 20 space, beer, onions, and cabbage.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people you've ever roomed with before, but that's a tough ask.
Oh yeah, I know that firsthand. Corned beef. Wow. No livestock, it sounds like.
They did actually bring sheep, goats, and chickens, but it's unclear to me whether they brought them for the voyage or for once they got there.
Yeah, those were going to be like breeding on the other side.
Definitely not pets, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So they brought sheep and goats and chickens, and it was kind of a very class system there. You had your captain, and you had the guy that was the governor, that was going to be the governor when they got there, and they had people in charge, and then you had a lot of indentured servants and staff. But it was kind of a mishmash of people just trying to make a better life for themselves.
Men, women, and children.
Men, women, and children, and it was just wet and cold the entire voyage. The seas were strong, and when they got there, they rolled in, and it was very underwhelming. It wasn't at all what they had been reading about in terms of these big cliffs or anything like that. And it turns out, because they weren't where they thought they were going to be. They weren't in Virginia. They were in Cape Cod.
Oh.
And so the storm had been so bad, it had just took them to Cape Cod, which is hundreds of miles away from where they. So they said, "All right, well, even though we're here, where land is here, we're supposed to go to Virginia. Let's go to Virginia." So they turned around, started going to Virginia. They didn't get very far. The weather got so bad. They said, "You know what? Cape Cod sounds fine for us."
well, so at the time, were there already people in Virginia? I mean, were they going to meet existing people, or were they the first?
No, there were other people that had gone to Virginia and talked about how great it was. Yeah, talked about how great it was. So they and those people had set up kind of a little colony. So they were trying to go to that. So they get here, and there's nothing there for them. They decided to call it New Plymouth, since Plymouth is where they left from in England. They get to this place. They say, "All right, this is Plymouth," and they get there, and they notice that there's some kind of houses and no people,
like structures.
And it turns out, there were places that they could live, but there were no people in them, except for some skeletons of some people. And it turns out that those were people from the Patuxet native tribe, and they had all been wiped out by smallpox.
Yeah, which the other Westerners had, or other Europeans had brought.
Right. So right, so there probably were some. I don't know how it got there. Like there weren't any other white people there, but they noticed that this town was kind of wiped out, but they had left all this housing for them. So they decided to kind of squat there, take their housing, and kind of a foreshadowing of things to come, I guess. They took their corn, and then all of a sudden, the another group, the Wampanoag tribe, showed up and started kind of having skirmishes with them.
They weren't happy about these folks from Europe moving into their territory.
Exactly. So, but they, for the most part, they did coexist. They were over there. The Wampanoag tribe didn't really try to go down there because it was kind of a cursed area when you think about it. I mean, it's an area where this
like
other
you guys
tribe
can
was,
have
and
it.
they had been wiped. Yeah, exactly. You can have it. And in fact, though, that I mentioned that only one person died on the Mayflower, but pretty much half of them died in the next year. By a year later, there was only 53 people left.
Wow.
And so every day you were burying somebody practically, and they would bury them at night though, because they didn't want the natives to see like that they were weak.
That
They
their
didn't want
numbers
them to see that
numbers were
dwindling.
dwindling. Yeah.
So they would bury them at night. Um, but then they would have to trade with the natives every night. So they coexisted. And then they found a guy named Somerset, a native named Somerset, and he actually knew English. And then they found another guy named Squanto. Now you may have heard of Squanto, also from the Charlie Brown show. There was a Squanto. I think he hung out with Pigpen, maybe.
Okay.
The Charlie Brown show. Again, not historically accurate.
Never heard of Squanto. I've never heard of Squanto.
Well, he was a native who was actually from the tribe that had been wiped out, the Patuxet tribe. And he actually decided I'm going to stay with the Pilgrims because that's my home. So he kind of lived with them, and he knew English too, because earlier in his life, he was actually stolen, brought to Spain to be a slave. And when he got to Spain, he was bought by some monks who decided that was going to be their thing. They were going to buy slaves and like civilize them, teach them to read and teach them language. And then, so they taught him Spanish, and then but he wasn't a slave anymore. So he decided to go to London, and he learned English. He was a really smart guy, and he learned English. And they said he talked like a Londoner.
Wow.
John Holland didn't talk like a Londoner because he was brought up in the Netherlands, or he had a Dutch accent. So they used to joke about how he had a Dutch accent, and the Indian guy had a London accent. But anyways,
Wow.
he knew English, and he was able to kind of negotiate between the Wampanoag tribe and the Pilgrims whenever they wanted something. There was a king. They had a king in the Wampanoag tribe, King Massasoit, where you hear some of these names, and I don't know if you know Massachusetts, but Patuxet is like Pawtucket, Massachusetts.
Ah.
Massasoit is like Massachusetts. I mean, these
All right.
names, and
Yeah.
Samoset, I think, became something. So, and so he would help them negotiate between the two tribes. And like I said, they existed pretty peacefully. And when they had been there a year, so the next November,
like 50 of them left.
There were 50 of them that had died. And they decided that they were going to have a special 3-day celebration marking the year that they had been there. And they invited the natives to come to the celebration. They brought deer. They brought 5 deer. The Pilgrims served quail. And now we know this as the first Thanksgiving.
Yes. And maize.
Now nobody in the U.S. really celebrated Thanksgiving, like I said, until Abraham Lincoln kind of brought it up a couple of hundred years later. They mentioned that we should have a Thanksgiving to commemorate 200 years ago when the Pilgrims did this too. It wasn't until the 100 years after that where FDR kind of federalized the Thanksgiving holiday in the 1940s. Thanksgiving was always on November 30th prior to that, and FDR backed it up a week so people could get to make it like a pre-Christmas holiday like it is now, and give
Yeah.
7 more days to shop for Christmas. And the Thanksgiving we know now is is kind of modeled after that. So it wasn't like they said this is going to be Thanksgiving and for years everyone's going to have turkey and commemorate us. And in fact, in the natives' writing, there's barely anything it wasn't very remarkable. If you read the writings of Squanto, he mentions it like in passing that, yeah, and there was a time where we brought 5 deer and they brought some pheasants, but he didn't say this was the greatest festival or anything like that. And so it wasn't even as memorable as today's music festivals, probably.
Yeah. So at the time though, they probably the Europeans who had come over probably really needed the natives to be their friends, right? Because they were dwindling. They didn't understand the land. They didn't necessarily know how to grow things as well. They were still learning about that. It was a totally different environment, and so it made sense for them to have this peaceful relationship with them. And this maybe was one of those times when they actually did something smart.
And let's give props to the natives who kind of put up with them just arriving and kind of squatting on their land and trying to make it themselves. I mean, they could have just as easily chased them out and said, get out of here. But like I said, they were kind of living on cursed land, and they, were just kind of watching them fail at this stuff.
They also probably didn't realize what was going to happen, right? I mean, if they could see 50 to 100 years into the future, it would have been a different story. But at the time, it was just like, oh, this is 50 people, no big deal. There's plenty of land, like lots of space, right?
And I think from their perspective, land is not something that you own.
Right.
Land is here for all of us. That's not the concept, the European concept of owning land, I think was kind of foreign to them.
Yep. Very true.
So, John Howland, his intention was to go back, and there was a ship called the Fortune. By the way, ships were coming and going all the time between the New World and England.
So they weren't as isolated as you might imagine.
In fact, the Mayflower went back. So they were kind of, every time one would come, then they would go back and pick up more people, and it was kind of always. That wasn't something that I really got a sense of when I was in school learning about this. I got the sense this was like the moon landing, that people decided to come and set up a new land, and that those were the only people, and that we descended from those 100 people. It wasn't really like that at all. So he was going to go on this boat called the Fortune, but he fell in love along the way.
And good for him.
Elizabeth Tilley was her name. Lizzie, as he called her, and she said, I'm not going back to England. I got nothing there. My life is here. And like all of us, listened to her. She was smart, though, in telling him to stay, because the Fortune ended up getting raided by French pirates. He probably would have been killed.
Oh.
And actually, he ended up living till he was 80 years old.
Wow.
He was one of the oldest people that came on the Mayflower. They ended up having 10 children, 88 grandchildren.
Wow.
And here's what's cool, Kelly. Here's the cool part. 2 million people today living in the U.S. are descended from John Howland.
Wow.
Including Humphrey Bogart.
Nice.
Alec Baldwin. And yours truly.
Really?
I am a descendant of John Howland, and which is, the way I started knowing about this guy was when we went to I've always known that I was the descendant of the Mayflower. Never really knew much about the story, but when we went there, I found out who it was, and then I saw the children's book called "The Boy Who Fell Off the Mayflower," and probably no coincidence that I'm related to the guy that fell off the Mayflower.
The boy.
And my wife my wife thought that was hysterical. Actually, she said, "Of all the people to be related to, you're related to the one who, had to cause a ruckus and had to be the drama.
That's awesome.
The big question I had, if I had a pilgrim here in front of me and I had to ask him questions, I'd probably ask him about the journey.
Yeah.
I'd probably ask him about the kind of food they had at Thanksgiving. But I also would probably ask him about what's the deal with the buckles on the hats.
Yeah. Yeah. Because those,
Didn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Was it a religious thing?
No, it turns out it was a myth that they didn't have buckles on their hats.
Oh.
They were so poor. Their pants didn't even have buckles. They didn't have buckles. Some of the statues that are made of the pilgrims have the buckle on the hat, but the statues were made like 100 years later when that kind of thing was popular.
That was more in fashion.
In fact, they didn't dress very nice.
I don't think people can always imagine what people were really like back then. And also because it's such a big span of time, we've just sort of amalgamated people from, everything from 200 to 800 years ago, just sort of they're an amalgamation of that time period.
Yeah, I was reading something that said why in all the pictures are they so dressed up? And they said, well, whenever somebody was drawing a picture of them, they would make sure to get dressed up. And it said it would be like 400 years from now if they assumed that all high schoolers wore tuxedos every day.
Right.
Because in the senior pictures, they're always wearing a tuxedo.
That's a good analogy. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so John Howland, he lived to be 80 something years old.
Yeah. 80 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
And I think his wife ended up even older than that, or maybe I think she was younger, but she lived longer. She lived into like 16. I think the 1699 or something. She lived.
Did they still call him boy when he was that old?
I think she always called him boy.
the boy who fell. That was her attraction to him.
She was always reminding him that he was.
Now, John, don't get too close to the edge. You remember what happened on the way over here?
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably why I'm, generations later, why I'm a little cautious about things.
Yeah. You got to stay away from the edge. Well, man, that was awesome. I know. I have to say, I like that. I like the liberties you took with this program because it was different to hear about an entire group of people, especially an entire group of people who are significant to the holiday that this episode will come out around, right? Thanksgiving.
What's cool is when you go to Plymouth, and it was really a pretty cool experience for me because like I said, I already kind of knew that I had descended from Mayflower people. When you go there, you can actually go and a lot of the gravestones are still there of these Mayflower people. Now, the problem was back then when they buried people, it would be like wooden markers, and the wood is deteriorated in 400 years. So like in the 1800s and 1900s, they had put up proper stone, but like in the 1850s, when they'd put up a stone marker, they would put it up, but then you can barely read it from the 18th. So they keep putting new markers to show where these people are.
Yeah, we need titanium or something. We need.
You can definitely, yeah. You can go visit these people, and it's just 100 yards from the shore where they landed. You can go up on a hill and read all of these names of Miles Standish and John Howland and Elizabeth Tilley and all these. So if you make this trip, you go to the Plymouth plantation. They have like a mock-up of what the plantation looked like. Then go to the gravestones and you'll kind of see some of the names that you've been hearing about all day. I definitely recommend it as a trip if you're in the Boston area. It's pretty cool.
It's not too far from Boston.
Right. No, it's not far at all. It's like 40 minutes from Boston. It's like near Cape Cod.
Yeah. I've been to Boston a couple times, but never done that. And I will put it on the list for next time. And, they made it there. They did so well. And they also all ended up in the same place as well. The place where Mr. Rogers, Andre the Giant, Evel Knievel, all our friends live.
Dirt Nap City.
That's right.
Undefeated. Dirt Nap City's undefeated. I think the thing that blows me away is this idea that there's 2 million people that exist today that wouldn't have existed if he hadn't have grabbed that rope. That blows my mind. Like literally, there's a 28-year-old guy falling overboard. They throw a rope. He was 12 feet underwater. The seas are rough. He doesn't have much of a chance of making it. They throw him this rope, and because he grabs that rope, there's 2 million people that exist today that wouldn't have existed. That kind of, including me, kind of blows me away.
Yeah. That is definitely the butterfly effect, right? The butterfly flapping its wings halfway around the globe and then changing the world.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. Well, hopefully you learned a little bit about the Pilgrims and Thanksgiving and some of our my forefathers for sure.
And for Mother, the Tilley lady.
Yeah, Elizabeth Tilley.
Elizabeth Tilley.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder, have you tried to do any of this on like a genealogy site on ancestry.com or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm pretty involved on Ancestry, and it's pretty cool to be able to trace it back that far. I was able to make the lineage pretty unbroken from me now, or actually my son now, all the way back 400 years. It's pretty cool to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks, Alex. I enjoyed it, and very apropos to the season.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving, Kelly.
Happy Thanksgiving, Alex. I'm thankful for you.
And thanks to all our listeners, too. Appreciate it. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Until next time, bye.